Today, we're diving into one of the strangest and most dramatic trials in modern American history, the case of Ted Kaczynski, the man the world came to know as the Unabomber. I mean, just think about it. For 17 years, this guy was a ghost. He was mailing these meticulously crafted bombs to universities and airlines, creating this nationwide sense of dread. It triggered one of the longest, most expensive manhunts the FBI has ever undertaken. But here's the unbelievable twist. After he was finally captured, you'd think the main event would be Kaczynski versus the prosecutors, right? Wrong. The real war, the central conflict of his entire legal battle, was actually against his own defense team. So to really understand how things went so completely off the rails in that courtroom, we need to back up a little. Let's get a handle on the sheer scope of his bombing campaign and just how serious the charges against him were. Just look at this timeline. This wasn't some short, chaotic spree. We are talking about a calculated 17-year wave of terror. It starts all the way back in 1978. The name the FBI gave the case, Unabomb, actually stood for University and Airline Bomber, and believe me, the fear he created was absolutely widespread. So, when he was finally caught, he was hit with a 10-count indictment for transporting and mailing bombs with the intent to kill. And the government made its position crystal clear. They were seeking the death penalty. This wasn't just about guilt anymore. This was a fight for Kaczynski's life. And it's those high stakes, the fact that the death penalty was on the table, that led to a massive, fundamental conflict right inside the defense team itself. Okay, so you have two totally opposing goals here. On one side, you have his defense lawyers, Quinn Denvere and Judy Clark. They're looking at this and thinking, the only way we can save this man from execution is to argue that he has a mental defect, that he's a paranoid schizophrenic. But for Kaczynski, that was a fate worse than death. He felt it would completely discredit his entire life's work, his anti-technology manifesto, and just paint him as a lunatic instead of a revolutionary. And this quote from a reporter in the courtroom, it says it all. You can just feel his rage. He didn't see this as some clever legal tactic. For him, it was a profound personal betrayal. In his mind, his own lawyers were now part of the very system he was fighting against, trying to dismiss his ideas by simply calling him crazy. And this wasn't some quiet disagreement that happened behind closed doors. Oh, no. It exploded right out in the open. And it pushed Kaczynski to take some really desperate steps to try and grab back control of his own story. I mean, he was completely boxed in. First, he tries to fire his lawyers. The judge says no, we're too close to the trial. Okay, so then he asks to represent himself. The judge denies that too, says it's untimely. Feeling completely trapped and believing his own team was about to publicly humiliate him, he saw only one way out. It was a truly extreme and desperate act. Cornered by the court, at odds with his own counsel, Kaczynski was left with pretty much one move on the chessboard, to avoid what he saw as the public spectacle of this mental illness defense. It really makes you think, what do you do when you're faced with two options, and both of them feel completely unbearable? So, there was option A. Go through with the trial. Let his lawyers portray him as a madman. Maybe, just maybe, he'd be spared the death penalty. But his entire ideology, his life's work, would be dismissed as the ravings of a lunatic. His legacy would be utterly destroyed. And then there was option B, plead guilty to everything. This would stop the trial cold. It would silence his lawyers' mental health arguments for good, and it would also save his life. But it meant admitting to all of it and disappearing into prison without ever really having his day in court. On January 22, 1998, Kaczynski made his choice. The scene in that courtroom must have been absolutely electric. The prosecutor stood up and one by one detailed the horrifying facts of each of the 16 bombings. And after each one, the judge turned to Kaczynski and asked the very same question. His answer, every single time, was a calm, clear, "Yes, Your Honor." And just like that, with those words, the trial was over. He pleaded guilty to every single count, and in exchange, the prosecution dropped their request for the death penalty. So the plea deal ended the trial, but this story was far from over. Because at the sentencing hearing, the spotlight finally shifted to the people whose lives he had completely and utterly destroyed. On May 4th, 1998, the sentence came down. 4 life sentences, plus an additional 30 years, with absolutely no possibility of parole. But before the judge made it official, the court heard from the victims and their families. For the first time, Kaczynski was forced to sit there and just listen, to confront the raw human cost of his ideology. Susan Mosser, whose husband was killed by a bomb just before Christmas, delivered this incredibly powerful and raw statement, speaking directly to him. And Lois Epstein, whose husband was severely injured, she spoke of the solitary life he chose for himself, and she wished that same fate on him. These statements were crucial. They ensured that the final record of this case wasn't about his ideas, but about the profound and lasting suffering that he caused. In the end, the Unabomber trial leaves us with this really tough, unsettling ethical question. The court said Kaczynski was competent enough to stand trial, yet he was denied the right to direct his own defense. It forces us to ask, where does a defendant's autonomy end, and where does a lawyer's duty to save a life begin? It's a question with no easy answers. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This is not legal advice.